The old tropes that were previously levelled at the Jews are just projected onto Israel to kind of give plausible deniability to the people doing the projection.
They can see the kind of savagery of unvarnished jihadist fanaticism, and they can come away and still think, yeah, but Israel.
They made their first application for a national demonstration on October the 7th itself, about midday. The bodies were still warm.
Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, thrilled as ever to be joined by Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
And one of our favourite returning guests, it's Jake Wallis Simons, author of Never Again. Welcome.
I'm flattered. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on. We've got loads to talk about today. We'll be discussing the Trump-Gaza peace deal, the 2-year anniversary of the 7th of October, and anti-Semitism in Britain. But the conversation won't end there if you're a Spike supporter, because we have an extra special treat for you. We are going to be presenting the Spiked podcast Unlocked. Now, this is live now, but it's behind a paywall. If you go to the Spike website and you log in, you can access this extra exclusive content. We'll be carrying on the discussion there. So please join us, and I'll explain a little bit more about that at the very end. Also, we should talk about the Battle of Ideas, which is coming up next weekend. If you're watching this on the Friday when it comes out, the 18th and 19th, we'll be doing 2 live Spike podcasts. Tom, do you want to tell us a little bit about those?
Yes, absolutely. So Spike podcast, this podcast will be live at the Battle of Ideas on the Saturday. We've got a really exciting panel. Alison Pearson will be joining us, Esther Kraku will be joining us, and Andrew Doyle will be joining us. An absolutely packed lineup. The following day, myself and Chris Snowden's podcast, Last Orders, all about freedom and the nanny state, will be at the Battle of Ideas. We'll be joined by Dominic Frisby, Patrick Christie's. Should be a lot of fun. And of course, all of us are speaking on loads of panels over the weekend, including yourself, Jake.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So you should go and get your tickets. The URL is battleofideas.org.uk, and if you use the promo code SPIKED, you get 20% off. So it's an absolute steal as well.
Got to be done. Get your tickets. We'll see you there. This episode of the Spike podcast is sponsored by Shopify. Running a small business can be hugely rewarding, but without the help of a marketing department, graphic designers and accountants, you can sometimes feel like you're on your own and you don't know how to grow. That's where Shopify comes in. Shopify is the commerce platform supporting millions of businesses all over the world, from small brands just getting started to established household names like Mattel and Gymshark. Shopify is who they trust to take their business to the next level. With Shopify, there's no need to learn tricky technical skills like graphic design or coding. Shopify's own design studio comes with hundreds of ready-to-use templates that speak to your brand from the start. If you need a snappy headline or sales pitch, Shopify's handy AI tools can generate polished content for your business at the touch of a button. It can even help you build social media campaigns to keep your customers in the loop. You'll feel like you've got a whole team behind you, even if you're the only person in your business. And the best part yet, Shopify offers world-class expertise on everything from supply chain management to international shipping. Whatever your business's needs are, you can rest easy in the knowledge that Shopify's got your back. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into cash with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your £1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.co.uk/spiked. Go to shopify.co.uk/spiked. That's shopify.co.uk/spiked. So we have the potential for peace in Gaza. Donald Trump has unveiled, or we're seeing the fruits of this peace deal. We're in phase 1. The hostages could be returned on Monday in exchange for many Palestinian prisoners, the IDF leaving Gaza City. Jake, is there finally cause for some hope here, do you think?
Yes, I think is the answer to that. I'm not sure we'll see peace in Gaza though, but we will see the end of the war. The two things are quite different. We'll talk about those. But in terms of the war, I think we are, in all likelihood, cross fingers, seeing the end of the war before our eyes, the fulfillment of hopes of all Israelis and their supporters around the world for 2 years. The release, we hope, of all hostages, all the 20 live hostages on Sunday, and then the remainder starting on Monday, that gruesome handover of remains. In return, the release of about 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, including a lot of lifers. These are very dangerous people serving life sentences for serious crimes, murders, and so forth. A lot of those, which is a big concession. Israel, after phase one, will remain in control of 53% of Gaza, which is quite a big achievement for Israel to get all the hostages back without anywhere near a full withdrawal. That's a big change and a big achievement for Israel. And then begins the negotiations for phase two. And this is where we start to think about peace in Gaza. Because after Israel has withdrawn with buffer zones intact, with the ability to go back in if necessary, then you've got to work out what happens in Gaza. And it's one of the geniuses of Donald Trump in this plan is getting everyone to agree phase one before agreeing the other phases. So they've agreed a roadmap, as it were, to use an old-fashioned term, but they haven't locked down the nuts and bolts of phase 2, 3, and so on. The parameters are going to be, or the desired result will be, Hamas laying down its arms, demilitarizing, surrendering with its leaders having amnesty, Gaza being administered by an international security force, technocratic government eventually giving way to a Palestinian government of some sort, but not the Palestinian Authority or Hamas. That's the wish list. But getting there is going to be difficult. Hamas have played silly buggers with regard to agreeing to disarming themselves. Don't forget, they placed their weapons on the ground and they're instantly into a fight with the clans that hate them. And at the moment, Hamas are much more powerful than the local clans. If they were to be demilitarized, as it were, they wouldn't be, and you'd see a lot of bloodletting. So they need those weapons to survive, if nothing else. But I think what we're going to be seeing is Hamas doing all it can to retain a position of influence over affairs in Gaza. As soon as it can, it will likely mete out bloody retribution against anybody who's opposed it in Gaza. There are various clans who have done so, as I mentioned, in Rafah and elsewhere. So we may very well see summary executions, running battles. Hamas struggles to retain its authority over the people in Gaza. The UN is going to resume delivering aid to the Strip, so Hamas may still be able to get aid from the UN and use that to retain control of the population as well. I think we're not going to see peace in Gaza anytime soon. Don't forget, in Gaza, there's a lot of animosity towards Israel.
Yeah.
A lot of radicalization, a lot of de-radicalism has to be done, even more so than in some of our cities, I would say, although it's a close run thing. But so not peace in Gaza, but certainly the end of the war, and from the Israeli point of view, the hostages back.
Yeah. Tom, what's your...
Well, I've just been struck by the extent to which this peace plan that seems to get over the line, at least in phase one, as you say, Jake, has called the bluff of the Israelophobic protesters in our own country and across the West. I mean, these people have been running around saying that their primary concern is essentially humanitarian, that they want the war to end, that they want the ceasefire. Yet as soon as one is agreed upon, and one that has the buy-in of the Arab states, one that has the buy-in of, nominally, at least at this stage, what remains of Hamas, one that has the buy-in of countries across the world, they're just screaming, not that kind of ceasefire. And I think it is a reminder that the anti-Israel convulsions that we've seen over the course of the past few years had nothing to do with this kind of fever dream version of the war that they were presenting. I mean, these are people who essentially thought that the right and just response of the Israeli government to October the 7th should have been to dissolve the entire Israeli state. That's essentially what they thought should have happened. And with that bluff called, we can see who they really are. I think it's also going to be interesting seeing, if this does continue in a relatively positive direction, how that will be interpreted on the international sort of geopolitical scene and what lessons will be learned, if any. I think countries such as France and the United Kingdom and Australia and Canada and so on, who engaged in that horrendous virtue signal of recognising a Palestinian state only a few weeks ago now, that's kind of being discussed as almost it's proven that they're irrelevant to the process. But I think that actually undercooks it a little bit. I mean, the fact that they were running around only as of a few weeks ago saying that unless Israel plays ball with a ceasefire, they're going to recognise a Palestinian state, they made it even less likely that Hamas would play ball with this negotiation or any other negotiation that were taking place. I think it's fair to say, and Marco Rubio has made this point over the course of the past 24 hours, that if anything, they probably slowed down us getting to this point, which I think is telling. And on a slightly more flippant note, it also raises an interesting question: is Trump going to get his Nobel Peace Prize? And if nothing else, I'm very much looking forward to that acceptance speech if they deign to give it to him. And I think it'd be quite difficult now, given that the fact that they essentially gave it to Obama for just being a great guy. So, you know, this is there's a lot of unknowns here, shall I say? But I think the impact of it across the West is going to be really interesting. Will there be a reassessment of a lot of things that have been said and thought about this conflict? Probably not, but at least there should, we could only hope that there would be.
So before we get into the next topic, I want to tell you about PIA VPN, which Spiked is really, really excited to partner with and they're doing an amazing deal where you can get 86% off their subscription. Now, why might you need PIA VPN? Well, finding out what's going on in the world is getting a whole lot harder, especially in the UK. The Online Safety Act is blocking vast swathes of content on social media, and often without you even realizing. And the way I get around this is with private internet access, or PIA VPN for short. And PIA is the VPN that I now always use and trust whenever I'm accessing the internet. Now, a VPN, or virtual private network, if you didn't know, is an app that hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. So instead of giving away your personal information and location to the world, PIA lets you change your IP address to one of 91 countries. This means you can gain access to websites and services that are only available in those locations. And it's not just that. Did you know that streaming services like Netflix and Prime Video have huge catalogues of content, but you can only access a fraction of it from your own country? Using PIA to change your location opens up a whole new world of streaming. Paying for Netflix without using PIA is a bit like paying for the front row seats at the cinema, but being forced to sit in the hallway. PIA is also essential for keeping yourself safe online. It protects you from the prying eyes of hackers, internet service providers, and anyone else with an unhealthy interest in your personal information or online activity. Personally, I would never go online again without it. And because PIA is available for all platforms, I never need to worry about my safety or privacy. It works on Windows, Apple Macs, iPhones, Androids, and more. Even better, you only need one subscription to protect yourself across all the devices you own. So, sign up now to the world's most transparent VPN provider and take advantage of our special offer. Spiked viewers and listeners can get 86% off a subscription to private internet access. That's just £1.67 a month. And you also get an extra 4 months thrown in completely for free. To take advantage of this incredible deal, just go to piavpn.com/spiked. That's piavpn.com/spiked. Even better, signing up is totally risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. You will not regret it. Sign up now at piavpn.com/spiked.
Jake, I mean, if you're out there on the streets protesting that this was a genocide, and now those same people are saying, well, actually, maybe we should carry the war on, or we want a total Palestinian victory, that kind of undercuts the point slightly, doesn't it? It kind of undercuts their claim.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most bizarre reaction to this peace agreement that I've seen was from Francesca Albanese, the deeply Israelophobic UN Special Rapporteur, who has been accused of basically being a supporter of Hamas. And she said something like, even if there isn't another shot fired, the genocide still goes on. And one wonders how you can have a genocide without any violence.
Yeah.
And I think that what she's talking about is that the genocide never was real in the first place. I mean, you and I knew that. Everyone knows that it's not real. To have a real genocide in which 2 million people are still living, even though the supposed genocidal force has the capacity to wipe them all out in an afternoon, that's quite a big burden on the term genocide. It was always a fantasy. The accusation of genocide has been leveled at Israel for many, many decades. This isn't something new.
Yeah.
It's just picked up pace since October the 7th, but it's been around for a long time, ever since the Soviet propagandists invented it alongside other ideas like apartheid and white supremacy and all the rest of it. It's always been simply an ideological position. I saw the Your Party poster.
Yeah.
If you can say that without throwing up, the Zara Sultana, Jeremy Corbyn camp of idiocy, talking about stop starving Gaza, ceasefire now, and end the genocide. Well, Gaza isn't being starved. There is a ceasefire. There never was a genocide, but they're still campaigning for it. They're in a world of their own. And it's a world, in a way, I think, where Israel is not a real place. Something about Israel, it's always lent itself to the imagination. From William Blake figuring the New Jerusalem in Britain to around the world, everyone had this romanticized, faith-filled idea of the butter-coloured stones of Jerusalem and Christ walking along it, and this is the wellspring of Western civilization, which it is. It's always lent itself to a version in the imagination that's totally divorced from the actual nuts and bolts and stones and people, the flesh and blood of the place. And I think that in a way, this mania of Israelophobia, which has gripped so much of the left, is in that tradition, is in that spiritual tradition, but with a dark and warped twist. Israel has now become this fantasy demon that doesn't exist, never has existed, in the tradition of anti-Semitism for many, many centuries, by the way, which they're now fighting against in an almost apocalyptic spiritual battle. And they'll never rest, as they said, until they've won. But what winning looks like is only going to be genocide against the Jews, it seems to be.
Yeah, and you've made the point, brilliantly previously, Jacob, in particularly in your book, Israelophobia, that there are just so many echoes with the old anti-Semitism. The hatred of the Jewish state compared with how people expressed hatred for the Jews in the past. They're so close and intertwined. This country that pulls the strings of global affairs. Well, I think we saw actually Netanyahu taking a bit of a spanking from Donald Trump. There was this image released of him being forced to apologize to the Qataris recently, where he's clearly the supplicant in that relationship.
We ran an image of him being spanked by Donald Trump. I was
Not
thinking, I haven't
literally.
seen that one.
Although we await for the release of that.
Wouldn't it? Yeah, you're right. I mean, look, in Israelophobia, I did talk a lot about that. Israelophobia came out on the 7th of September, 2023, exactly a month before October the 7th, and describes, it sort of mapped out the dry lanes through which the flood of anti-Semitism would subsequently flow. And in my new book, which came out on the day of the Manchester attacks, weirdly enough, you were both at the book launch, and it was great to see, Never Again, How the West Betrayed the Jews and Itself. I'm really trying to draw attention to the fact that these people who are so obsessed with hatred for Israel, again, it's not the real place. They don't care about the real Palestinians. If they did, they would be marching when Palestinians are killed by other Palestinians, which happens quite a lot. They don't care about that. They would be marching against Hamas, for example. No, what it's about for them is about the West. If you ask any of them, how do you feel about Britain? How do you feel about democracy? How do you feel about the West? You will find an equal level of animus as they have towards Israel. Israel is just a cipher for hatred and for a hatred of and the desired subversion of our way of life and everything that we hold dear.
I suppose this, flows very nicely onto the next topic, doesn't it, in terms of the October 7th anniversary? Because just to tack on to what you were saying there, Jake, I think that was something which that moment more than any other exposed that fundamental rot within all of our own societies. And as we mark it this week, it is worth remembering just how apocalyptic in scale that pogrom was in southern Israel. More than 1,000 civilians just butchered, the rape of women, the mutilation of women, the taking of the hostages, the fact that all of this was live streamed around the world. And what was presented to us was such a simple sort of moral test, which is, are you going to side with this liberal democracy that is under assault by jihadist lunatics? Are you going to side with the world's only, Jewish state as it sees all of its worst nightmares realized as a attack on a barbaric and enormous scale is inflicted upon it for no other reason than the people who are being targeted are Israeli and Jewish? And the fact that so many people at best stuttered and at worst kind of said the pogromists have a point will haunt us for some time to come. I think that whilst, as we've been talking about, the war coming to an end is something to welcome, our kind of internal convulsions over these questions is going to continue. Anti-Israel sentiment has become the kind of glue for much of the left these days. This new alliance that we see being consummated, which is building for many decades now, essentially between kind of Islamist politics and supposed anti-imperialist left-wing politics. I mean, that is literally one party now. That is literally one clear-cut alliance that exists in our politics. So whilst the horror of the pogrom, the disgustingness of the reaction, we can be thankful that the war is coming to a close. But even within our own societies, we're going to have there's a lot of work to do to kind of pare back what has been said, what has been done, and the kind of extent to which, whilst a lot of these prejudices against Israel and prejudices against the West have been building for a very long time, for a certain proportion of the population, that's now they feel like they've been proven right. They feel like they've been justified, and so that's going to take a lot of time to unravel, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would only add that those leftists who are aligning with the Islamists now and supporting their efforts to enforce their authority over Britain, which is what they're trying to do, I can only hope they don't learn what happens when such an effort is successful. Because if you cast your eyes back to the Iranian Revolution, for example, 1979, that's exactly what happened. The leftists joined with the Islamists against the Shah, against the corrupt imperial power, or a corrupt monarchy. And when he was toppled and the revolution took place, the first thing the Islamists did was stamp out and obliterate the leftists who had supported them, and enforce a Sharia law in which anybody who was secular was imprisoned, tortured and killed. I just hope that they don't find out the hard way what happens when you support Islamists.
Definitely. And it's worth going back. Tom, you were talking about the reaction to the anniversary. I think it seems to have been forgotten or perhaps even buried that the pro-Palestine protests, the hate marches, as they're often called, those really began in the wake of October the 7th. They did not start with Israel's invasion of Gaza. This was something that was a celebration of an attack on Israel. It was clearly not a humanitarian
No,
cause.
and like the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, this was reported in the Jewish Chronicle a while ago. They made their first application for a national demonstration on October the 7th itself, about midday. The bodies were still warm at that point. I mean, the moral horror of that is something
The fighting was still happening.
The
yeah.
fighting was still happening, indeed. It was still
around the Nova Festival attack time.
It was still ongoing.
Yeah.
And also, as we now know from the Community Security Trust report that came out last year into the immediate aftermath, the kind of carnival of anti-Semitism, which included, almost 100% rise in anti-Semitic assaults. We're not just talking about, as horrific as it is, destruction of property or graffiti or horrendous things said on social media. Assaults were up by 100%. This peaked before the ground invasion proper began, and described it very well as a carnival of celebration of October the 7th. People are kind of trying to forget this now or downplay this, to pretend that those things that they tweeted or said in the wake of this horrific assault were just by the wayside, and we can't let them do so, because it's something which really made absolutely clear that there is a kind of moral rot, particularly in the left, but not exclusively. And I think one thing that I've found particularly chilling is that, and I'm sure we've discussed this before in this podcast, but I think we all knew after October the 7th how the Palestine Solidarity Campaign were going to react. I think we all knew how Jeremy Corbyn was going to react. I think we all knew how the Socialist Workers' Party were going to react. I mean, they put out a headline immediately after October the 7th saying, "Rejoice."
Yeah.
So we've had their number for a very long time. I think what has been more concerning is that kind of middle of the road, sort of midwit centrist opinion, if we can even call it that. The sort of people who I think even 10 years ago would have tried to look both ways, or just gesture to how complicated it is, or say, "I'm not sure, I haven't done enough research," or whatever it is, sided pretty heavily with the wrong side here. I'm thinking of the James O'Briens, I'm thinking of the Gary Linekers. These are absurd characters in our discourse, but nevertheless, I think they are a kind of indication of the fact that even though this was building for a very long time, if you think about the kind of anti-Israel prejudice that was being pumped out by the BBC or the New York Times or all these more kind of supposedly centrist outlets, it's really kind of come to fruition now in response to this war. And the fact that happened after October the 7th, the thing that proved the necessity of Israel defending itself, the thing that proved that these jihadists are a menace not just to Jewish life but to humanity itself. The fact that they have this realization, the penny drops for them, that actually Israel is the problem after that, I think is very revealing about how deep that rot runs, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me there's something going on here, and I think it's got to do with those psychological experiments where you enter a room and you expect it to be one way, even if it isn't that way. You still think that it is the way you expect it because you're so heavily invested in expecting something to be a certain way. And there's a sort of deadening of the imagination, I think. We live in what Simon Sebag Montefiore calls the comfort democracies. We live in an age of comfort. Alexandre Khrushchev called it the eternal Sunday. We live in a state of the eternal Sunday, and it feels like for those people looking at what Hamas did on October the 7th, they see with their own eyes, because Hamas recorded it.
Yeah,
they see beheadings and the murder of children and the people who murdered them then taking a drink out of their fridge. You see abductions, the rapes we didn't see because we were protected from those images, but we heard about them. We saw all this, and yet people can see it, and still they can see the kind of savagery of unvarnished jihadist fanaticism, and they can come away and still think, yeah, but Israel.
Yeah.
And And I think that in a similar way, we can see hordes of people taking to the streets on October the 7th in Britain, on marches, and just afterwards, on marches organised by people who have strong links to Hamas. Again, the Jewish Chronicle revealed that. Many of the key organisers of the protests have been pictured with Hamas leaders in Gaza in the past.
Yeah.
People chanting slogans that were initially openly pro-Hamas, but then were thinly masked. People can see that happening. They can see that it hasn't actually got to do with anything real. No compassion for Palestinians. They know that and can see it, and yet don't really internalize it. Oh no, these are just decent people who just don't want children to be killed. You can see that no genocide is taking place, but you think, oh, there must be a genocide. You can see that there's no famine. All the pictures coming out of Gaza showing starving children have been shown to be of kids with health problems. You can go on Snapchat maps and you can Snapchat heat maps, see what people are posting in Gaza. You can see there's loads of food and no one's starving. You can see that, but people still believe the propaganda because the imagination has been deadened in terms of understanding the extremities of suffering and the extremities of culture, because we've never been exposed to it ourselves in our eternal Sunday life. And I think that felt all the more painful after the Manchester attacks, where the Jewish community just felt, we've been telling you for 2 years that they want to kill us. We've been begging you to take it seriously, to stop these marches, to stop this incitement, to stand up against the incitement from the UN, from the BBC, for the government to take a lead. And what have you done? You recognise Palestine, putting the stamp of approval on the idea that actually it's not Hamas that's the problem, it's Israel. They need to be pressurised. And on October the 7th itself, even after the Manchester attacks, Keir Starmer didn't appear. He didn't make a speech. There was in Berlin, the Brandenburg Gate was lit up with Israeli colours. That didn't happen in Britain. Keir Starmer fucked off to India and danced with some Indians to sort of try and secure a trade deal. That was his way of marking October the 7th. It was just, it couldn't be clearer how much disdain these people hold for the Jewish community and for Israel, and for everyone else. They just can't even see what the reality is, and it's coming for everyone. That's the irony of it.
And I do want to stick with that theme as well, because how can we deny that this is a problem for all of us? I mean, clearly a problem for British Jews. It was brought home, by an attack by a man called Jihad al-Shami, who we now know, since we last recorded an episode, called 999 and said, "I'm killing Jews on behalf of the Islamic State." How much clearer does the message need to be that this is a serious problem in Britain?
No, absolutely. And one of the horrible conclusions I came to in the wake of the attack in Manchester was I was almost slightly surprised it took this long. And I'm not, that's nothing to dwell on too much, but it's a reminder that the kind of drumbeat that has been going on, not just since October the 7th, but before it as well, I think it's worth saying, this sort of ambient anti-Semitism which has been building up, the fact that even before October the 7th, Jews made up about something like a quarter of the victims of all religiously motivated hate crimes in the UK. The fact that you would see stories crop up from time to time constantly of just elderly Jewish men in North London being sucker punched in the street, and it never really got out of the Islington Tribune or whatever it was. This was never really confronted in a way that if you saw these constant outbursts of racist violence and animus in relation to any other community, it would cause some genuine soul searching. It's an example I often go back to, but there's a Jewish cemetery in Kent which was desecrated 8 times in 10 years, and people just don't know that these things were taking place. October the 7th happens and it puts all of it on steroids. And again, there's no reckoning with why this might have taken place, the extent to which that, as we've been discussing, anti-Semitism has become entirely bound up now with anti-Zionism, and the way in which the old tropes that were previously levelled at the Jews are just projected onto Israel to kind of give plausible deniability to the people doing the projection. And then you get to the point of Manchester and you do think, I'm surprised it took this long, partly because of that build-up of hatred, which has been left entirely unchecked, even by the sorts of organisations which are nominally devoted to challenging hatred, but also because of the fact that we've been so utterly complacent about this problem of Islamist extremism. And as we've been discussing already, this is something which has menaced us time and time again, which has been inflicted on the British population time and time again. That in Manchester in 2017, 22 people were murdered by a jihadist in the name of the Islamic State, many of them very young girls, and yet even now we can't take that threat seriously. So it's one of those things where there's a grim inevitability about what's going on at the moment, and whilst that's not much comfort for British Jews, I'm sure there are a lot of people who recognise this and see it. It's just that the political establishment have blinded themselves to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say just two things come to mind in response to that. I mean, the first is that one of the things that Jihad al-Shami reportedly shouted when he was on the rampage in Manchester was, "This is what you get for killing our children."
Yeah.
And that was very revealing, because the idea of Jews relishing killing children is an ancient idea, beginning in 1144 in Norwich with the blood libel, and then spreading around the world. And it's that idea has been at the center of the animus against Israel for the past 2 years. The cooking of the figures to make out as if women and children are most of the casualties, the fabrication or the manipulation of the images to show you mainly pictures of or only pictures of civilians. I mean, people they watch TV, they don't ask, okay, all I'm seeing is civilian casualties, where are all the fighters?
Yeah.
They don't ask why those fighters have been edited out of the pictures they've been seeing by Hamas, not by the BBC, but yes. And ideally, Hamas wants them to see pictures of children, and Israel has become known as the child killers, but they're not. They're not the child killers. They're trying to kill Hamas, who are trying to get civilians killed. And that idea, the old blood libel, it's fascinating that that's what, above all, he shouted. The other point was extremely interesting, but it's gone completely out of my mind. But I will note that Jihad's father was called Faraj. So
There we go.
go.
The fact that his name was Jihad,
Yeah.
it kind of reminds me back to previous terror attacks, but one of the terrorists in the first London Bridge attack, when he was on that Channel 4 or ITV show called the Jihadi Next Door, hiding in plain sight doesn't really do it justice.
It's come back to me.
There we go.
Thank you for doing that. The Manchester Arena bombing.
Yeah.
I think that for me, and there's a bit in my book about it, it says so much about what's going on in our society in this complacency towards Islamic terrorism. Because there's a bit in my book where I talk about Rory Stewart, and he goes on Sam Harris's podcast last year, and Sam Harris tries to get him to explore the link between suicide bombing and Islam. Why? And Rory just won't accept that there is a link. He says there's violence in every religion, violence in every part of the world, even the Buddhists are violent. And he then, at one absurd point, compares Jihadi John leaving Britain to go to fight for Islamic State to himself leaving Oxford and going off to manage a province in Iraq. So the spirit of adventurism and so on. And he won't accept the link between suicide bombing and Islam. And he then, on a subsequent podcast, calls Sam Harris Islamophobic for making that connection. Now, fast forward to the Manchester Arena bombing, when Salman Abedi walks into the Manchester Arena with that heavy backpack on.
Yeah.
And the security guard, Kyle Lawler, later told an inquest that he saw him, was suspicious of him, and thought, no, I mustn't be Islamophobic and draw the connection between a Muslim walking in with a heavy backpack and a suicide bomber. And so he stopped himself from stopping the attack because he feared that he was Islamophobic. Now, I'm not saying he was a devotee of Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell, but this stuff has been pumped into our culture by what I call in my book the centrist fundamentalists, who are just determined that we must all stop thinking for ourselves and start thinking along the lines of their ideology, with horrible results.
Thank you so much for watching the Spike podcast, and thank you to our friends at Private Internet Access for sponsoring us. Now is the time to take control of your digital life and get PIA for 86% off. Click the link in the description below or scan the QR code on screen. And remember, if you're a Spike supporter, then this episode isn't over yet. You can now watch the Spiked podcast unlocked. Just go to the Spike website, log in, and you'll see it on the homepage. So join us there right now.